This changes everything for the Boston Celtics as we have a brand new, huge Celtics trade update that is not only brand new information, but changes the outlook of Brad Stevens and his plans this offseason. We're going to dive into exactly what those are and discuss what this means going forward, as well as a few other updates, folks. A ton to go over today. You're going to want to stay tuned to the end. But before we get into it all, if you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Celtics content. So make sure to hit that subscribe button, folks. We had a lot of information come out over the past couple of days, specifically yesterday surrounding Jrue Holiday and the Boston Celtics, but also the Celtics involvement in Kevin Durant, and things have kind of been taken out of context. It blew up out of proportion, but we have some big updates nonetheless here to go over. And folks, you're going to want to stay tuned here because there's a lot of things to dive into. Now, you see here, there's a little trade we'll get into later, but it all started with this. And this dropped last night, and you can see here the Celtics have discussed trading for Kevin Durant per Zach Lowe. Watch out, Celtics fans. Now, of course, I didn't make a video on this for the simple fact of I wasn't entirely sure if this was A, taken out of context. I listened to the Zach Lowe podcast, and B, I wanted confirmation from Zach Lowe to make sure that's actually what he meant. Because if you actually listen to what he said, it wasn't as clear cut as this. And you can see this here again. Zach Lowe on the Zach Lowe show said he's heard rumors that the Celtics being involved in a Durant deal. And the exact quote was, you can see in the third paragraph, I've heard that there have been discussions of 3-team Durant-related trades where Jrue Holiday moves somewhere. This led to speculation that perhaps the Celtics could be trying to trade for Durant. And then Zach Lowe came out and clarified, because we rushed at the end, when I mentioned the very broad idea of a 3-team deal involving Jrue Holiday and KD, I meant to indicate KD would go to a third team in those deals, i.e. maybe a team on his list, and not to Boston. The Celtics are not looking to trade for KD. I don't think such a 3-team trade is really in the ether anyway. Thought this would be obvious, but should have stated more clearly. So just wanted to clear that up for anybody who was wondering or maybe saw that online about the Kevin Durant situation with, Jrue Holiday being involved in it. He wasn't saying that Kevin Durant was being traded to the Celtics, but what he was saying is that Jrue Holiday has been actively in talks with, of course, a lot of teams, and it seems here that all signs are pointing to Jrue Holiday being traded. Now, you can see this here again. The full quote was, the focus for me is Jrue Holiday. I've heard there have been very broad discussions of a 3-team Durant-related deal. Now, again, he kind of clarifies that and saying he doesn't think this is necessarily fully in the works. But I want to dive into one team that no one's really talking about surrounding Jrue Holiday. Because if you can get anything from this report, it's that the Celtics are in the works and trying to make a move for Jrue Holiday. We've been discussing it in the channel for a little bit now. Like, there's been some Jrue Holiday, trade talks. There's also been some Jaylen Brown trade talks. It seems that Jrue Holiday, out of the bunch, is probably the most likely to go. Reporters are saying that they probably want to keep Kristaps Porziņģis, which makes some sense to a degree. It's a lot easier. I mean, they don't have a center right now, right? With Luke Cornett probably leaving, Sam Hauser, not a center, but he's most likely on the way out as well. They want to keep Kristaps in order to have a big man on the squad. Now, regarding Jrue Holiday in particular, things start to get very interesting. And we know a report came out just a couple days ago that the Kings and the Mavericks are in trade talks regarding Jrue Holiday. And a team that hasn't really been spoken about here too much is the Sacramento Kings. And there's been some new reports lately, if you listen to what Jake Fisher had to say. Also, of course, we covered the Mavericks portion of this. The Jrue, the Kings part of it is the very interesting part to me, because not only are they in, but of course, it's also interesting now that the Kings are a massive part of this, equation here. And I do ultimately think, the Kings make some sense. They, of course, traded off a lot of their guys. Would they want to take on that amount of salary? That would be the big question mark going forward for the Kings. But folks, it does make some sense, and here's what Sam Amick had to say, and this is where kind of things change regarding the Jrue Holiday situation, because the Celtics are looking for, potentially, at least throughout there, the proposal of the Celtics getting involved in the Kevin Durant deal in the form of a 3-team framework. But also, I do have indications they're looking at it a lot. Sam Amick said, I don't know how much they're going to overhaul the roster, but I think they are looking at big stuff and small stuff. The point guard pursuit is very real. I don't know where they will land on that front. It's kind of, if only Jrue Holiday was 5 years younger, I think that option, type of option has been considered and explored. And of course, we know the Kings don't have a point guard now. They traded away De'Aaron Fox. They traded away a lot of different guys. They have Zach LaVine, Malik Monk, DeMar DeRozan on the roster, and we'll dive into DeMar in a minute here. It would make total sense for them to, at least if they're trying to compete, and it seems to be that's what they're trying to do, right? Because you don't make all these moves to take on Zach LaVine, you take on Jrue Holiday if you're not trying to compete. And of course, it seems the Lakers are not the Lakers. I mean, the Lakers are also involved in Jrue Holiday, which we'll get into in a minute here, but the Kings are trying to compete and trying to acquire a point guard. And that's exactly what Jrue Holiday is. And it would make sense if they're trying to compete here. And an article dropping this trade framework. Now, I'm very curious to see what you guys think about specifically this trade framework. Because again, I don't think a trade where they get involved in the KD sweepstakes are super likely. And Zach Lowe confirmed this, and that's why I didn't have a video on it. Like, it doesn't seem the most realistic, and it seems a bit far-fetched. However, you look at all the reports about trade talks being focused around Jrue Holiday from the Celtics side of things. And the Kings and the Mavericks, there's been a lot of buzz surrounding the Mavericks lately being focused on Jrue Holiday. And again, that's still very, very possible. I had a video on it. Feel free to check that out after this one is over. But for the Kings side of things, it makes a ton of sense. Now, let's dive into what a package may look like here. And with that in mind, let's take a look at the deal. This has the Kings getting Jrue Holiday and the Celtics receiving DeMar DeRozan and Devin Carter. For starters, finding a deal that works money-wise, as previously mentioned, is already difficult as the Kings don't have a lot of options when it comes to medium-sized contracts. They have mostly high-money players like Domantas Sabonis and Zach LaVine or Keegan Murray and Jonas Valanciunas. So for this one here, you're kind of looking at it in the sense of, all right, if you're the Celtics, you're trading the salary of Jrue Holiday, but you're also taking in the money of DeMar DeRozan, but you're getting a bit of a different player back. Now, I'm very curious to see what you guys think about this deal because it is a interesting one to say the least. DeMar DeRozan, is he a better player than Jrue Holiday? He's a better scorer than Jrue Holiday. He is not a better defender. However, we have to keep in mind now that Jayson Tatum is not going to be playing next year. So if the Celtics are trying to retool and still compete in a very weak Eastern Conference in general, then this would make a lot of sense in the sense of like you're shedding a bit of salary, but you're also like most importantly, you're taking on a different style of player. But I think for me, if the Celtics were to trade Jrue Holiday, they would probably be doing it in more so a salary dump, taking on, expiring deals and things like that. And of course, for DeMar DeRozan, he has one more deal left on his contract, or one more year left on his contract after this season, and he's making $25 million a year, essentially, which is less than Jrue Holiday, doesn't put them under yet. But, you pair this with getting rid of a few of the other players, then it can start to make some sense around, on the back end, right? But this is what I want to discuss because, again, this is kind of a trade that's been proposed. And with the Kings being more and more involved every single day with the Jrue Holiday sweepstakes and just with all these rumblings that have happened, not necessarily the Celtics getting KD, but being involved in Jrue Holiday trades. And the more that the offseason goes on, the more and more clear it's becoming that Jrue Holiday is the most likely one to be involved in a trade here. Yes, he's under contract for the longest. He makes the most money. Of course, among the players who are realistically going to get traded, Sam Hauser, Kristaps, and Jrue Holiday, excluding, of course, Jaylen Brown is making $50 million a year. It's interesting. And I think ultimately it's pretty big. You have the Lakers at plus 600 to land Jrue Holiday. I think that also makes a ton of sense. You get, defender, and he'd probably play shooting guard, of course, on that team with Luka Doncic. It's kind of similar to what he's been doing, kind of what Austin Reeves has been doing. But again, how does it fit with the Lakers and Austin Reeves? There's a lot of question marks there. So regarding teams that are actually involved, the Kings are the number one priority, but wanted to clear up a few things there. But folks, changes everything. If a lot of these teams get involved and the Celtics plans become more and more clear as the draft approaches, maybe, the Celtics try to move up in the draft and they move off of assets that way. There is going to be a lot of new reports, a lot of new rumors. And either way, folks, we're going to keep you up to date with all the latest Celtics news. You're going to want to make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let me know down below, would you do the DeMar DeRozan for Jrue Holiday deal? It's an interesting one. You guys are beasts. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you later.